Hello, environmental science scholars, and welcome to another lesson within Tutorial 2. Today we're looking at Lesson 2.4 Food Chains and Food Webs. So, energy in most ecosystem originates from that sun. It is captured by primary producers through that process called photosynthesis, where that solar energy will then be converted into chemical energy. And then that energy is passed through the different trophic levels. Essentially, looking at this chain of who is consuming who and where is that energy flowing, all of this is showing a food chain. A food chain is a linear sequence of organisms through which nutrients and energy pass as one organism eats another. So we are looking at where the energy is originating from within that food chain, beyond the sun, and that's the primary producer. So where's that energy now flowing? The energy that the primary producers have captured from the sun. So it will be potentially flowing into a primary consumer. So we're going to be using arrows to indicate where the flow of energy is going as one organism is consuming another. So let's say we have, I don't know, grass or something, and then let's say we have a rabbit being the primary consumer. And let's say we have a hawk come on in and eat that rabbit. Well, we're going to be using that arrow to show the flow of energy from the primary consumer, the rabbit, flowing into the secondary consumer, which is the hawk. And let's say there was another larger bird, I don't know, or maybe a weird human likes to hunt hawks and they consume the hawk. Well, we will be using that arrow to show the flow of energy going from the hawk to the tertiary consumer. If you have viewed lesson 2.3, where you're looking at the 10% rule, you already know that the energy flowing within a food chain, not all of the energy starting with the primary producer will be, available and flowing the different trophic levels. Remember, only 10% is actually available to the next trophic level. So only 10% of the stored energy in the primary producer is actually available for that rabbit to consume. If you have not watched that tutorial, make sure you do so. So, ecosystems, though, have much more complex relationships or feeding relationships than what is typically shown in a food chain. Looking back at that bear example, bears definitely eat a lot more than just salmon or a lot more than just fish. Sometimes you might see them munching on some berries, for example. Or looking at this food chain, frogs sometimes actually eat other frogs. So they can actually act as a tertiary consumer, but a food chain will not show that. It's only showing a linear sequence of events. So this might be a better representation of what's actually happening in an ecosystem. So what is this called? Awesome. That is a food web or an example of a food web. This shows that there's a lot more than just one thing that will, be consuming another. So looking at these berries here on the bottom, this is our primary producer. Not more than just like these green flies are feeding on the berries. We have butterflies, we have grasshoppers. So we're using the arrows to show where the energy is flowing into. So you always want to remember that. So the energy of the berries is flowing into this bird called a titmouse. So that's where you want that head of the arrow to be pointing. If the arrow is pointing the opposite direction, it was pointing from the bird to the berries, that's saying that the berries ate the bird and it's consuming that energy. And that would be actually really scary. And I would not want to go berry picking anymore. So food webs are essentially a bunch of food chains all, together, interconnected to show the complex feeding relationships. And it's showing where all that energy is flowing, starting from that primary producer and all flowing through all the different trophic levels. The first trophic level in most food webs are the primary producers. So a lot of times when people are creating food webs and they want to show the complex relationships, the best way to start is from the bottom. Where's all the energy originating from besides the sun? And that's gonna be the primary producer. So they'll be like listing and showing all the different primary producers at the base or the bottom of the food web. And so within a terrestrial biome, a biome here on land, like the savanna in Africa, sorry, I love Africa. So I'm gonna be using them a lot in examples. Um, all the primary producers or the photoautotropes are plants, all the different plants, these different trees, and then also grasses as well. The next level, you can see that above that will be whoever is consuming that primary producer, which are going to be are the primary consumers. And then we can see above that, which ones are acting like secondary consumers and so on and so on. So sometimes you can see multiple arrows, leaving a certain organism, meaning that, for example, this giraffe is eaten by both a cheetah, a jaguar, I guess. I thought those are both the same animal. Hmm. Oh, and then also a lion. But also we have aquatic biomes. We have biomes that are existing in water, like freshwater, saltwater. So their very first level, the very first trophic level, are also primary producers, photoautotrophs. However, they're not going to have like plants or trees. They're going to have algae, phytoplankton, and also seaweed, and even some bacteria are going to be the base of the food web. So every organism has a role in its community, and the stability of a community depends on all organisms being there. So I want you to think about these questions here and respond. What will happen if the blueberry bush was removed? What about the rabbits? What about the hawks? Every organism has a role, and sometimes multiple organisms are dependent on them. If any of that stuff was removed, we're going to have a series of changes known as that trophic cascade. But what could also happen to a food web if an invasive species was introduced into the community? And so here is a simple food chain from Australia. We have this certain kind of grass as our primary producer. Grasshopper is our primary consumer. Mouse is our secondary consumer. And this special kind of super predator that's a carnivorous marsupial predator in Australia is called the quoll, feeding on that mouse as a tertiary consumer. Well, there's a lot of invasive species in Australia, and then one has been the fox. And so the fox shares a very similar diet, but wider, meaning it's more of a generalist. It can feed on a lot more, but very similar again to that top predator that was naturally there, the quoll. This added predation places an increased pressure on the survival of the native insect species. The quoll and fox both have a very similar niche. However, as a result of competition between the two species, that quoll's niche is actually shrinking. What is actually available for them to use is coming less and less because that fox is essentially outcompeting the quoll and eating everything. And sometimes the fox even preys on the quoll themselves. And then that's been having repercussions on the native insect populations. So with the quoll in decline, these guys are rampant, running rampant and harming other, you know, populations as well. All right, guys. So don't forget to complete your notes, practice questions, and there's also an activity as well where you're going to be looking at the food web in an Antarctic biome. All right, guys. Bye. Have a good day.